If you have two shoes, this is time you need to sell one and buy a sword. If you have two trousers, now it's time that you need to sell one and buy a sword. Because now it is a time for revolution. And this revolution is not on the streets. This revolution is not on Facebook. This revolution is in the mind. Because if you are not in charge of your mind, your body can become only a tool that will be used by your oppressor to conquer you and to dominate you. In fact, Steve Bantu Biko said that the most potent weapon in the hand of the oppressor is nothing else but the mind of the oppressed. If you are not in charge or in control of your mind, of how you think and what dictates your mind, your body will be only a tool that can be used to enslave you and also to create chaos in your own communities. Peace and power, peace and blessing, peace and light to all African people from wherever you are. It's a pleasure again to find you in our weekly conversation where we discuss some of the important subjects related to our future, which is the liberation and the emancipation of Africa. We don't fight anybody. We don't fight to undermine anyone's effort to become better. We only fight for one thing, to improve ourselves. We only fight to liberate ourselves. Our fight is or can be resumed or actually can be summarized in two words: freedom and emancipation of African people from wherever they are. And this is what actually motivates us. This is what comes in our mind the first thing in the morning. And this is what keeps us moving, even though there are a lot of oppositions. So we are fighting to free, to liberate Africa and to emancipate Africa. So peace and blessing, peace and love, peace and light again. So today, I just want to share with you some of the thought that I've been having after I was reading the book by Sun Tzu, The Art of War. I found something described in that book that is fundamentally true and applicable to our situation as African people. There is a mystical creature in Sun Tzu, Art of War. This mystical creature, or a snake, if you attack it by its head, it will, or if we strike it by its head, it will attack you with its tail. If we strike it by its tail, it will attack you with its head. And if you strike it in the middle section, it will attack you with both the head and the tail. Let me repeat that again. There is a mystical creature described in Sun Tzu Art of War book. This mystical creature is so dangerous in a way that if you strike it at the head, it will attack you with this tail. If you strike it at its tail, it will attack you with its head. And if you strike it in the middle point, it's going to attack you with both the tail and the head. And that is actually how I see the freedom of us as African people. It means this creature, in either case, it's going to affect you no matter how you approach it. But you need to approach it, because if you don't attack it, if you don't strike it, it's going to kill you. So you need to strike it so that you can eliminate it. But no matter how you come against it, it's gonna still bite you back. It's gonna still attack you back. So if you attack it from the head, it's gonna react with its tail to harm you. If you attack it from its tail, it's going to react with its head to harm you. And if you attack it in the middle point, it's gonna react with both the head and the tail to attack you. So this is just the same picture that we have here when we want to think about the true freedom of Africa. We need to forget about African countries' independence, all these things. No. That was nothing like a freedom. Independence within dependency is not a freedom, right? But the true freedom for Africa, if we want to go for it, we must be, first of all, understand that we will be affected. There will be consequences. that will disrupt our current lifestyle, that will have an impact, sometimes negative impact, on our current situation or lifestyle before we recuperate the situation and before we re-emerge again. There is a price to pay. That is actually the core of the message. There is a price to pay for anything. I'm always hearing African people talking about China, talking about, I don't know, Indonesia, talking about all these Asian countries that have been able to emerge. But before we begin to talk about how other people have succeeded with the, with their struggle, how other people have succeeded with their struggle, and how they've become improving or developing nations, we need to ask firstly, what was the price they paid for them to be who they are today? We cannot try or always want to emulate something that we see on other people before we know what kind of price they've paid for them to be what they are today. And also ask ourselves if we are able to pay that price that is required for that so-called development that we see in Asia, particularly in China, in Indonesia, in Singapore, or wherever else we see development. So this is the situation that we have in front of us, is because we always want to be free, but we are not ready to pay the price that is required for us to have the freedom that we want. In other words, we talk about freedom, believing that that freedom will happen one day when the Western society will change its mind, when it will realize that it has done a lot of damage to the rest of the world and as well as to the environment. Therefore, it has to change its mind, it has to repent, and then begin now to treat Africa in a more humane way. But this is a dream that will never going to be realized in this real world in which we're living. It's a dream that will remain as a dream, because the only thing that can change the mindset of the Western society towards Africa is the attitudes of Africans towards themselves, first of all. How do we consider ourselves? Capable of something, ready to do something, or people who always want the change to come, I don't know, from heaven, or to come from a single leader, a superhuman somewhere, coming from somewhere, to automatically change the situation in Africa so that we can suddenly get jobs, get electricity, get economy, get the, healthcare and all these things that we need. But we don't realize that these things were built by the people who have them. Obviously, China didn't go, I don't know, to Buddha to ask him to give them the kind of development they have today. They had to pay the price, to accept, to pay the price. There is always a sacrificial generation that in every society that has to be sacrificed for the other generations that are coming after, to build upon the foundation which has been laid by that generation, which obviously sacrificed itself. So talking about it, what is our attitude towards the endeavor for African freedom, African liberation, and African emancipation? What is our attitudes towards, firstly, ourselves? What is our attitudes towards this goal for African liberation and African emancipation? We're talking about African liberation and emancipation. We need to understand that we need to consider these four domains, and we need to master the activities in these four domains. We must master the economic domain of Africa. We need to be the masters of the African economy. We need to become the masters of African education. We need to become the masters of African politics. We need to become the masters of African industry. You see, these four areas are very important. Are very important. I can even add some peripherals areas such as, or domains such as healthcare and other things. But first of all, we need to master African economy. It means the production of goods and exchange of goods. We need to master the political domain. How do we define the policies that obviously determine what goes to where, to whom, and then who does what, all those things, those kind of interactions that we have in our societies. And number three, we need to master the domain of education. Who is teaching our kids? Who is teaching us? And what does it teach us? It's very important because, education is the preparation of the future generations. And number four, we need to master the skills or the domain of industry. It means producing the tools, technologies that we need for managing our lives in the 21st centuries. And until Africa becomes the master of these four domains, we cannot talk about African freedom. We cannot talk about liberation. We cannot talk about emancipation until we become the masters of our economy, the masters of our politics, the masters of our education, the masters of our industry or technology or technological production. We cannot really talk about freedom, liberation, or emancipation of Africa. And what is the price that we have to pay in order to acquire the predominance in these four skills or in these four areas? What is the price are we ready to pay in order to become the masters in these areas? This is the challenge. This is where we are stuck. This is where really we are stuck as we're speaking right now, right? We are starting from the economy. We have 17% within Africa, within the continent itself. We have the commerce within Africa, or the exchange of products and services within Africa is 17%, and then 73% actually, 83% is the exchange that we have as African with the external world. How can we talk about economic freedom if we are unable to develop, the commerce within Africa, inter-African commerce and exchange of goods and products? And that implies for us to have even that platform in place, we must firstly manage or master the skills of production of industry, because we cannot talk about commerce if we are not producing. You see, in 2018, there was what we call the African Continental Free Trade, which is a very wonderful initiative, of course, saluted by everyone. But the point is, how can we have policies to facilitate the commerce while we don't have policies to boost the production, the local productions of goods and services, so that we can go with them into our internal commerce? We don't produce. The Africa is still in that condition. As Thomas Sankara said it, we consume what we don't produce and we produce what we don't consume. So what is the need for us to have the African free trade if we are not producing at home the vehicles, the cell phones, all these things that we are using on a daily basis? So at the end, when this free trade, African continental free trade, is eventually enacted, what will happen is that China will find a way to obviously pour its products in Africa so that it can now sell its products through the African, obviously, continental free trade. Because let's say, for example, a country such as Congo, a colonial enclosure country such as Congo, or such as Burundi, such as, Angola, which is depending on, external products or imported products, almost from sugar, from salt, from everything, even from the chicken that people eat in the Congo, it should be imported from outside. From Brazil or whatever else. So in this situation, you engage this country in free trade. What is the product, the local product that this country produce in order to bring it into the African free trade? There's nothing except the natural resources, which we don't have yet the capacity to transform in Africa. So this is a challenge that we have, economically speaking. So before we talk about anything, right, of African free trade nature, we need to begin by asking ourselves, What do we produce? And when we master this domain of economy, then we can talk about African liberation, because as it is now, Africa produce what the world wants, right? What the world cannot live without. And Africa is condemned to remain in the condition of poverty and the precarity as we see it in Africa today. So the freedom, economic freedom that we talk about is this capacity, self-built capacity of Africa to master now its own economies instead of depending on the external debt or credit or whatever else that the IMF and the World Bank provide to Africa to enslave us furthermore. We can now depend on ourselves, on our own capacity to actually produce what we need and sell it to ourselves before even we think about the external world. And we have that capacity. We are 1.2 billion of people in Africa, and we can do it. And we have all the resources. It's just that we are not ready to pay the price for the freedom, right? Now, talking about moving from the economy, we look at education. As I said, education is the preparation of future generation. The one who controls your education, he controls the future of you as a people. So we cannot think about Africa becoming free if we are still abandoning our education into the hands of the people who otherwise have never wanted us to be free. Because one thing we need to understand as African people is this. We need to understand this clearly, is that a strong person will never teach you how to get rid of his power over you. A strong person will never train you to be able to get rid of his domination over you. You understand? So we need to be, the masters of the education that we provided to ourselves and that we provided to our kids. This is fundamentally important. Therefore, we cannot hope that Africa will become free one day by being educated with, European curriculum, which is not designed to make us people who are able to challenge the authority or the hegemony of European people, but making us people who have to emulate the so-called development of Europe into Africa without thinking about the context, culture, tradition, and all these fundamental differences that exist between Europe and Africa. We must become the masters of our own education. It's very, very important because education is the preparation of the future. So, do we wish to see our kids the masters of this continent? Yes, we need to begin by right now designing a curriculum that teach people how to that teach people the knowledge of Africa, what is under their feet, and that teach people how to use what is under their feet and transform it into whatever tools that they need for the development of the motherland that we call Africa. So in the educational domain, we need to become the masters of this domain by ourselves. We need to be able to educate ourselves. One thing that I'm always amazed about is that when you look in 1960s, for example, there were few graduates in Africa, but these few graduates were able to change the status quo of Africa in a way that the colonial system was shaped, and then Africa began to get what is called today African independence, even though it's a fake independence that we don't believe, because we don't believe that freedom can be negotiated for, right? So we had few graduates. For example, in the Congo, we had less than 20 graduates in the Congo. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly about the number, but it's less than 20. The last I checked, graduate in the 1960s. These people were able to change the status quo of the country in a way that the colonial system was challenged. But today, how many PhD degrees that we have in Africa? Many of them. We have, I don't know, millions of PhD degrees. We have master's degrees. But why can't these intellectuals think about a proper Afrocentric, Pan-African curriculum that we can obviously implement in our schools so that we can produce the next generation of leaders who actually are connected to their nature, to their environment, which is Africa. Why should we still look at the education that we get from Harvard as the best education? How should we still continue to look at education that we get from France as the best education? So that when you have the money, you don't wish your kids to study in Africa, you send them abroad to be educated there. What kind of education do we expect them to get there, which can actually develop or free Africa? Because one thing that we need to know about education, education is the second nature. Education is the second nature. It means education that you go through creates in you a kind of nature, an identity that becomes your second nature. So the person who is educated in France, he has been embedded into the French nature or French identity. A person who is educated in America or in American curriculum, he has embedded in him the world view of America. Is not exactly going to be able to challenge or to look at Africa in a way or in a perspective through which we need to look at Africa, so that we can obviously tackle the question of African liberation and African emancipation. So we have a lot of PhD degrees in Africa today, but they are unable to design a curriculum that can, change the course of history in Africa, so that we can look at the future with a bright hope, or look at the future with a positive perspective, so to say. So the education is very important. We need to master the domain of education. But the question is still, since I've been asking this question, the question is, are we ready to pay the price for that? Because as the last I checked in Africa, we're still feeling proud of being educated in France, being educated in Germany, being educated in America, with all these certificates that I can call academic alienation certificates that we are proud of. Can we now change our mindset? Are we ready to pay the price of now, removing ourselves from the international recognition in terms of education? That international recognition that pushes us to look at the educated person as the one who is educated in France, which is now in reality is being alienated from his African roots, so that he can think as a little British, a little French, and a little Portuguese, according to who colonized you. This is very important. Number 3 is for us as African people to master the political domain. We must become the masters of our own politics. If you look since the 1960s, the period that is called the post-independence period in Africa, we have been buying into the Western philosophies for development, or Western politics of development. We started with what was called the modernization theory. You know what is modernization? Modernization was that for Africa to develop, it must abandon their culture. Africans must abandon their culture, their names, their language. They must be speaking French, English, Portuguese, or whatever else. They must adopt English name, and they must leave their village, because village was a symbol of backwardness and symbol of uncivilization, so that we can live in suburbs. And that was the modernization theory. Simply, we must be derooted from our ground, which is our ancestry knowledge, which is our tradition, our culture, and everything that defines us as African people must move from those things to adopt the European way of looking at the world, which is all about violence. And that was the modernization theory, and that was emphasized or advertised or actually even enforced into Africa for its own development. Our politicians now, we're adopting those ideas to implement so that Africa can develop. And apart from the modernization came the time that of economic development and industrialization. Those two, what they meant literally is that Africans, for them to develop, they must go to the West to buy, firstly to get the money, and go back to the West, the money that they borrowed from the West to buy the equipments for the industrial development of Africa, or to hire the engineers from the West and bring them to Africa to build the bridge and the roads. So we built the bridge, but we didn't build the minds of the people, of the African people. And now we are suffering, being indebted by the money that we took to build the bridge and the roads. Economic enslavement of Africa is where we are today. So this is because we were following the politics inspired by the people who want to control and dominate us. So we need to begin now looking at the politics differently. It means we need to obviously fashion our own political ideologies as African people for our own development. And this is not something new. Our political ideology has been there already for a long time. But the problem is that we don't want to pay the price to apply it. And so that you know, our political ideology is Pan-Africanism, African nationalism, or black nationalism, or Pan-Africanism. That is our ideology, politically speaking. But are we able to use it? We are still calling ourselves Democrats. We are still calling ourselves capitalist. We are still calling ourselves Republican. We are still having left and right political parties. We don't even understand what they are. Because America has got left and right wings, we want to become also left and right in our countries, but we don't see something changing because these political philosophies are not rooted into African situation, circumstances, and context. They are all the emulations of what we see in Europe, right? So we must master the political domain of our lives if we want to free Africa and emancipate Africa. And number 4 is the industry, right? It is the industry. Can you imagine that in every cell phone in the world today, there is a component, a most important component in that cell phone that is coming from the Congo? Can you imagine that in most of atomic bombs that exist, or nuclear bombs that exist in the world today, there is something that we call uranium, in most cases coming from Mali and also from the Congo. So why don't we ourselves as African people begin to use these resources that we have to build technology, to build industries that can obviously protect Africa? And when I'm talking about industries, I'm including military industry. Because as I started by emphasizing about economy, one must put in mind that before you aim for strong economy, you must firstly build a defense system that will protect your economy. Because if you aim for economic development without the means to protect and defend that economy, you are building it for your oppressor. You must keep that in the mind, because that is like a person who goes to buy an expensive car, but he doesn't have a garage where he can park the car. And then he leaves the car parked on the streets. The next morning, a thief will come and steal the car. We want to develop economically in Africa, but what is the means do we have to defend our economy and to protect that economy whenever we are under attack by our oppressors? It happened in 2011, not far, 2011. In case you forgot, Muammar Gaddafi had lots of money. Libya was economically developed to the point that Muammar Gaddafi by himself donated 300 million US dollars to the projects of African satellite, which required something about 400 million US dollars. But that money, no matter how big he was, no matter how rich he was and how big the money was, it was unable to defend Libya when it came under NATO's attack led by Barack Obama, a sellout, and France. Do you remember that? That money never protected Libya. Why? Because it didn't have the military capability to defend itself against NATO. And on top of that, because Africa didn't have the military capability to resist and defend Libya, right? So if we want to develop economically, we must begin by thinking about how do we protect our economy against the predator. Because as John Henry Clark told us, Africa is still the richest land in the world. Africa has things that many want and they cannot do without, and they've never wanted to pay for. Therefore, they will always find an excuse to invade Africa. So if you have something that is valuable as Africa, as it is today, right, which other people want because they cannot live without, and they have never wanted to pay for, you must expect war. You must expect war. And this is the mindset that we, if we want freedom and emancipation, we must adopt right now. And this was actually emphasized and overemphasized by His Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I in 1963 at the African Union, which was then the Organization of African Unity. He emphasized in his speech, he said that the autonomy in Africa, or the African autonomy, depends solely on the military arrangements that we are making today to protect ourselves and to defend ourselves. Because whether you know it or you think about it or not, the war will come. And when there's no war, we shouldn't think that it's a peaceful time. No, it's a ceasefire, because the modern world, it is in constant war. And even in the history, the world has always been in a war. And actually the history of human being, or the history of the world, is written in blood. It's the history of people who were defeated against people who were defeating others. Or actually it's the history of people who were conquered and the people who were conquering. And every time people found themselves being conquered, they had but one responsibility, which is to organize themselves and to rise again and to defeat their enemies. And we are in that situation today as African people, but are we ready to pay the price for our freedom? This is the question mark that we need to think about. And this freedom, brothers and sisters, is not coming from one person. It's not coming from one supernatural leader that will come, I don't know, from heaven or from water to serve Africa. This freedom and this liberation and emancipation we're talking about is not going to come from heaven. If it was meant to come from heaven, it would have happened a long time ago, because as far as I know, Africans are praying every day. This freedom will come from the grassroots level, which is you and me. It's coming from all of us. It's coming from all of us at the grassroots level. That's where this freedom must come from. And by this, let me introduce you to what we have created, in line with everything that I've just mentioned, everything that I've just explained. We have created this wonderful political party. It's not a country-based political party, because as far as the true revolutionaries are concerned, we believe that our so-called countries are nothing but colonial enclosures that have been created to keep us apart from our fellow Africans who are suffering from the same situation, and then so that we can be able to be conquered, to be dominated, and obviously to be exterminated, as we are realizing it right now in Africa. So we have what we call the African Continental Unity Party. If you have not yet heard about the ACUP, African Continental Unity Party, please join us. Please search us. We are everywhere, on YouTube, on Facebook, whatever. Join the ACUP. This is a grassroots movement where we are coming together as ordinary African people, because we believe that the liberation and emancipation of Africa is solely, lies in our hands as African people. The power to change Africa is with the masses, is not with the leaders. Because in most cases, the leaders that we have been hired to do the job that they've been doing better since the 1960s, which is the job of impoverishing Africa and obviously building the worst. Belgium has been built over the resources of the Congo, right? France has been built over the resources of, Mali, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon. All these 14 countries who are speaking French have been building France, because in France, there's no resources. They don't have wealth, natural resources they don't have. And if you ask any French person, How comes that you are a superpower nation but you don't have resources? They will tell you that we don't have the resources but we have ideas. French people believe that they have developed themselves with ideas. Can an idea feed you? Can an idea put a fuel in your car? Can an idea put a gas in your house so that you can cook the meal? No. Right? No, it cannot. So France has been built over the exploitation of Africa. So we need to understand that. We need to understand that. So we have come now. What we have come up with this party is that let's go beyond the boundaries that have been established among us, so that we are divided. We don't look at ourselves as people who are facing common situation. We have ACUP for political reason, for political unification of Africa and its liberation followed by its emancipation. Now, when you talk about economic development, we have what we call Ubuntu Solidarity Society. It's an enterprise that we have founded. It works in a way that we bring our money together so that we can invest in projects that have the potential of economic high returns. Because individually you cannot compete against the corporates that are taking over in Africa today. These mega or multinational corporates that are taking over in Africa today, as alone economically, you cannot do anything against them. The best way we can do this is to bring our money together. So are we ready to do that, to pay that price, to invest together, to come together as African people without national biasness, without ethnic biasness, without tribalistic biasness? Can we come together, put our resources together? We want liberation, but we don't want to engage our money to liberate Africa. We cannot liberate Africa without our personal and direct commitment, without our economic commitment, without our intellectual commitment to this cause of liberation and emancipation of Africa. We must commit with everything that we have. We have to bring our money together to build industries, societies, to build companies, to hire our own people, to provide jobs for ourselves and to produce what we need. Right? We talk about education. We have the Free-Minded Pan-African Academy, which is an academy for future leaders in politics and in business. The same way that soccer teams prepare themselves, or soccer players prepare themselves before the competition, we must understand that we need to prepare the future leaders before the competition arrives, before the time of the competition arrives. What we have in Africa today is people who are surprised, people who are suddenly getting into power, and that they spend 2 years in studying, the situation or the system in which they have found themselves, right? When we elect these people, who prepared them for particular functions which they are assuming? For example, those people who we appoint as ministers of education, when were they prepared to fulfill that responsibility as a minister of education or minister of economy? When were they prepared? And were they prepared as a team so that they can collaborate among themselves? No, they are surprisingly being put in those positions, and they will spend like 2 years to understand the system. And when they figure out what is the system now, they begin to think about how they can firstly put the money aside, their own money aside, for the after office time. And before they think about you who elected them, it's over, my friend. The 5 years period is over. And now you need to go and elect others to continue the same cycle. So this is the situation. Education is the preparation of the future generations, and we need to begin that now. So if you want to be educated with an Afrocentric knowledge content, you have to reach out to us, and we will put our academy to your disposal so that you can get the knowledge that you need to think as an African and to act as an African. Because sometimes we speak as African, but we think as Europeans and we act like fools. This is what happened with us in most cases. And lastly, we must build industries. Thank you very much for your time. I urge you to support the ACUP in what we do, because without your support, as I said, this is a grassroots movement. Without your support, we cannot go nowhere. We cannot succeed. The powers that afflict Africa are so big that one person will be able to change the status quo. It's only when all of us come together, understand the power of unity and act together, then we'll be able to change the situation. Look, all the major corporations, they work together. The banks work together. The mega corporates all working together as a team. Why us as a poor people, as common people, can't we figure out that it's time now that we must team up together, come together, work together to change the situation of our lives? It is high time. Please support what we do. You can share this video as part of your support. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel as part of your support. You can join us and we can work together as part of your support. You can donate, with your money as part of your support. You can donate with your skills as part of your support. But most importantly, you are not supporting anybody. You are supporting the vision of African liberation and emancipation. And this will be beneficial to you first of all, but most importantly to your kids and your 4 kids and the generations to come. Peace and power. If you have 2 shoes, sell one and buy a sword. If you have 2 trousers, sell one and buy a sword. Because now it is time for revolution. And this revolution is in the mind. It's not in streets. It's not on Facebook. It's here in the mind. Because if you are not in charge of your mind, you are then a tool that is being used by someone else. Maybe that is your oppressor or our oppressor. Then we can look at you as an instrument of our oppression. That is not a good mark. Thank you. Until then, we see you again. Peace and power.